foster divine impulses, whereas some other yogi offer fire of God. In the last verse, Krishna portrayed the sacrifice made by sages who have made their abode in the Supreme Spirit. But he now depicts the yajna performed by worshippers who wish to be initiated into yoga. These novices undertake sincere performance of yajna to gods to foster them. That is, they strengthen and augment divine impulses in the heart. Here, it is useful to remember how Brahma had directed mankind to foster gods, that is, to foster divine impulses in the heart, by yajna. The more virtues there are cultivated and garnered in the heart, the more the worshipper advances towards the ultimate excellence until at last he attains it. The novice worshipper's yajna is thus aimed at strengthening the forces of righteousness in his heart. A detailed account of the divine treasure of righteousness is given in the first 3 verses of chapter 16. Righteous impulses lie dormant in all of us, and it is an important duty to cherish and wake them up. Pointing this out, Yogeshwar Krishna tells Arjuna not to grieve because he is endowed with these godly merits. With them he will dwell in Krishna and attain to his eternal being, because righteousness brings the ultimate good. On the contrary, there are the demoniacal, devilish forces which lead the soul to rebirth in low and inferior forms. It is these negative impulses that are offered as oblation to the fire. This is yajna, and also its inception. Other yogi perform yajna by offering sacrifice to the accomplished teacher in his heart, the sacred fire that is an embodiment of God. Krishna further adds that in the human body, he is the adiyajna, or that in whom the oblation is consumed. Krishna too was a yogi and an accomplished teacher. These other yogi offer oblations to the godlike teacher who also annihilates evils like fire. They perform sacrifices aimed at this accomplished teacher who is also an embodiment of sacrifice. In brief, they concentrate their minds on the form of an accomplished teacher, a fully realized sage. While some offer their hearing and other senses as sacrifice to the fire of self-restraint, others offer speech and other sense objects to the fire of the senses. Yet other yogi offer all their senses of action, ear, eye, skin, tongue, and nose, to the fire of self-control. That is, they subdue their senses by withdrawing them from their objects. There is no real fire in this case. As everything cast into fire is reduced to ashes, even so, the fire of restraint destroys the outward-looking senses. There are then yogi who offer all their senses of perception, sound, touch, form, taste, and smell, to the fire of the senses. They sublimate their desires, and thus turn them into effective means for achievement of the supreme goal. After all, the worshipper has to carry on his task in this world itself, assaulted all the while by good as well as evil utterances of people around him. No sooner than he hears words that arouse passion, however, he sublimates them into the feeling of renunciation, and thus burns them in the fire of the senses. It happened so once with Arjuna himself. He was engaged in contemplation when all of a sudden his ears were thrilled by lilting melody. When he looked up, he saw Urvashi, the heavenly courtesan, standing before him. All the other men were enthralled by her sensual charm, but Arjuna saw her with filial sentiment as mother. The voluptuous music thus grew faint in his mind and was buried in his senses. Here we have the fire of the senses. Just as objects put into fire are burnt out, sensual forms, sight, taste, smell, touch, and sound, are bereft of their power to distract the worshipper when they are transformed and shaped in accordance with the requirements of his goal. Having no longer any interest in sense perceptions, the worshipper does not now assimilate them. Words like other, apre, and anye, in the verses under discussion, represent different states of the same worshipper. They are the varying, high and low, states of mind of the same worshipper, rather than different forms of yagya. Yet other yogi offer the functions of their senses and operations of their life breaths to the fire of yoga, self-control, kindled by knowledge. In the yagya Krishna has so far spoken of, there are a gradual fostering of pious impulses, restraint of the working of the senses, and parrying off of sensual perceptions through a modification of their intent. In a still higher state than this, yogi offer as oblation the function of all senses and operations of life breaths to the fire of yoga that is lit up by knowledge of God. When this restraint is integrated with the self, and the operations of breath and the senses are stilled, the current which stimulates passions and the current which propels one towards God merge into the self. The outcome of yagya then emerges as God realization, the culmination of this spiritual exercise. When one dwells in the God who had to be realized, nothing else remains to be achieved. Yogeshwar Krishna again explains yagya. Just as many perform yagya by making material gifts in service of the world, some other men perform yagya through physical mortification. Some perform the sacrifice of yoga, and yet others who practice severe austerities perform yagya through the study of scriptures. There are many who make sacrifice of wealth. They contribute riches to the service of saints. Krishna accepts whatever gifts are offered to him with devotion, and he is a benefactor of those who make these gifts. This is the yagya of wealth or riches. To serve every man, to bring those who have strayed back to the right path by contributing wealth to the cause, is the sacrifice of riches. These sacrifices have the capability to nullify the natural sanskars. Some men mortify their senses through penances for the observance of their dharma. In other words, their sacrifice, made according to their inherent properties, is penance, humiliation of the body, and it belongs to the stage between the lowest and highest levels of yagya. Wanting inadequate knowledge of the path that leads to God, the Shudra worshipper who is just setting out on the way of worship undergoes penance by rendering service. The Vaishya, by acquisition of divine riches. The Kshatriya, by demolishing passions and anger. And the Brahmin, with his ability to be united with God. All of them have to toil alike. In truth, yagya is one, and there are only its lower and higher stages, governed by innate properties. My noble teacher, the revered Maharaji, used to say, to trim the mind along with the body and senses in keeping with the goal is penance. They tend to digress from the goal, but have to be pulled back and applied to it. There are many who practice the yagya of Yug. Yug is the joining of the soul, wandering amidst nature, with God who is beyond nature. A clear definition of yoga is found in the 23rd verse of chapter 6. Usually, the meeting of two objects is yoga. But is it yoga if a pen meets paper or a dish meets a table? Of course not, because both are made of the same 5 elements. They are one, not two. Nature and the self, by contrast, are 2 entities, distinct from each other. There is yoga when the nature-based soul meets the identical God, and when nature is dissolved in the soul. This is the true yoga. So there are many who resort to a strict practice of restraint because it is conducive to this union. The practitioners of the yoga of sacrifice, yagya, and they who are given to severe austerities, keep in view their own self and perform the yagya of knowledge. Here, non-violent but severe austerities, such as restraint, religious observance, the appropriate posture of sitting, serenity of breath, withholding of the mind along with physical organs, retention meditation, and perfect absorption of thought in the Supreme Spirit, are indicated as the 8-fold features of yoga. There are many who undertake self-study because they aim at self-knowledge. Reading books is but the first step to self-knowledge, for in the true sense, it is derived only from contemplation of the self, which brings about attainment of God, and the final outcome of which is knowledge or intuitive perception. Krishna now points out what is done for this yagya of knowledge or contemplation of the self.
Apane juhvati pranam, prane panam tatha pare, pranapana gati rutva, pranayama parayana.
As some offer their exhalation to inhalation, others offer their inhaled breath to the exhaled breath, while yet others practice serenity of breath by regulating their incoming and outgoing breath. Meditators on the self sacrifice the vital air to apan, and similarly, apan to pran. Going even higher than this, other yogi restrain all life winds and take refuge in the regulation of breath, pranayama. That which Krishna calls pranapan, Mahatma Buddha has named anapan. This is what he has also described as shwas prashwas, inhaling and exhaling. Pran is the breath that is inhaled, whereas apan is the breath which moves out. Sages have found by experience that along with breath, we also imbibe desires from the surrounding environment, and similarly, transmit waves of inner pious as well as impious thoughts with our exhalations. Non-assimilation of any desire from an external source is the offering of pran as oblation, whereas suppression of all inner desires is the sacrifice of apan. So there is generation of neither internal desire nor grief because of thoughts of the external world. So when both pran and apan are properly balanced, breath is regulated. This is pranayama, the serenity of breath. This is the state in which the mind is supreme, for restraint of breath is the same as restraint of mind. Every accomplished sage has taken up this subject, and there is mention of it in the Ved. This is what the revered Maharaji also used to say. According to him, the one name is recited at 4 levels: Vaikhari, Madhyama, Pashyanti, and Para. Vaikhari is that which is manifest and audible. The name is pronounced in such a way that we, as well as other men sitting around us, may hear it. Madhyama is muttering the name at a medium pitch, so that the worshipper alone, but not even the man sitting beside, may hear it. This articulation is made within the throat. There is thus the gradual generation of an unbroken stream of harmony. When worship is yet more refined, the stage is reached when the worshipper develops the capacity to visualize the name. After this, the name is not recited, because it has now become an integral part of the life breath. The mind stands as an onlooker and just views what the breath shapes. When does it come in? And when does it go out? And what does it say? Sages of perception tell us that it articulates nothing except the name. Now the worshipper does not recite the name. He just listens to the melody of the name arising from his breath. He just watches his breath, and that is why this stage of breath control is called Pashyanti. At the stage of Pashyanti, the mind is set up as a witness, an onlooker. But even this is not needed when there is yet further refinement. If the desired name is just imprinted on memory, its melody will be heard spontaneously. There is no need of recitation now, for the name rings in the mind by itself. The worshipper does not recite any longer, and neither does he have to compel the mind to hear the name, and yet the recitation goes on. This is the stage of Ajapa, of the unrecited. It will be a mistake to think, however, that this stage is reached without commencing the process of recitation. If it has not been initiated, there will be nothing like Ajapa. Ajapa means that recitation which does not desert us, even though we do not recite. If only memory of the name is firmly set up in the mind, recitation begins to flow through it like a perennial stream. This spontaneous recitation is named Ajapa, and this is the recitation by transcendental articulation, Parvani. It takes one to God, who is the essence beyond nature. There is no variation in speech after this, for after providing a view of God, it is dissolved in Him. This is why it is called Para. The mind is linked with the breath. That is the state of victory of the mind, when the eye is set on the breath, when the name is incorporated into the breath, and no desire of the external world can enter into the worshipper. With this, the final outcome of yajna emerges. Yet others who subsist on strictly regulated breath and offer their breath to breath and life to life are all knowers of yajna, and the sins of all who have known yajna are destroyed. They who partake of restricted food offer as oblation their breath to breath, life to life. My noble teacher, the revered Maharaji, used to say that the food, posture of sitting, and sleep of a yogi should be steady. Regulation of food and pleasure is a necessity. Many yogi who observe such discipline renounce their breath to breath, concentrating on inhalations and paying no heed to exhalations. With each incoming breath, they hear Om. Thus, men whose sins have been destroyed by yagya are men of true knowledge. Krishna now speaks of the outcome of yagya.
यज्ञशिष्टामृतभुजो यान्ति ब्रह्म सनातनम् नायं लोकोऽस्त्ययज्ञस्य कुतोऽन्यः कुरु सत्तम.
O Arjun, the best of Kuru, the yogi who have tasted the nectar flowing from yagya attain to the eternal supreme God. But how can the next life of men, bereft of yagya, be happy when even their life in this world is miserable? What yagya generates, what results from it, is nectar, the substance of immortality. A direct experience of this is wisdom. The one who feeds on it becomes one with the eternal God. So yagya is something which with its completion unites the worshipper with God. According to Krishna, how can the next world bring happiness to men bereft of yagya when even the mortal human birth is beyond their reach? It is their inevitable lot to be born in lower forms and nothing better than them. So the observance of yagya is a necessity.
एवं बहुविधा यज्ञा वितता ब्रह्मणो मुखे कर्मजान् विद्धितान् सर्वान् एवं ज्ञात्वा विमोक्ष्यसे.
Many such yagya are laid down by the Ved, but they all germinate and grow from the ordained action. And performing their various steps, you will be freed from worldly bondage. There are several steps of yagya elaborated by the Ved, God's own words. After realization, God assumes the body of accomplished sages. The minds of men who have become one with God are then mere instruments. It is God who speaks through them. So it is in His voice that these yagya have been enunciated. Krishna tells Arjuna that he should know that all these yagya have arisen from action. This is what he has said before also, in chapter 3, verse 14. He has just pointed out that all those whose sins have been wiped out by yagya are the real knowers of yagya. And now he tells Arjuna that he will be freed from the bonds of the world if he knows that yagya arises from action. Here, the Yogeshwar has clearly stated the meaning of action. That conduct is action by which yagya is accomplished. Now, there is no harm in engaging ourselves in trade, service, and politics, if, in doing them, we can earn divine riches, contemplate an accomplished teacher, restrain the senses, offer the oblation of outgoing breath to the incoming breath, sacrifice inhalations to exhalations, and regulate the vital winds of life. But we know that it is not so. Yagya is the only exercise that transports one to God the very moment it is complete. Do any other work you like, if it takes you to God in the same way. In fact, all these forms of yagya are but internal processes of contemplation, forms of worship which make God manifest and known. Yagya is the special ordained mode that helps the worshipper to traverse the path that leads to God. That by which this yagya is accomplished, regulation and serenity of breath, is action. The true meaning of action is therefore worship. It is usually said that whatever is done in the world is action. Work without desire or selfish interest is the way of selfless action. Some feel that it is action if they sell imported fabric for greater profit. They feel they are men of action. For others, dealing in indigenous goods to serve the country, is the way of selfless action. If one acts with dedication or trades without thinking of profit and loss, that is the way of selfless action. Fighting a war or contesting an election without thought of winning and losing makes one a doer of selfless action. But these deeds cannot bring salvation. Krishna has said categorically that the ordained action is only one, and he has told Arjuna to do it. The performance of yajna is action, and yajna is sacrifice of breath, restraint of the senses, contemplation of the Supreme Spirit, the accomplished teacher, who symbolizes yajna, and finally, regulation and serenity of breath. This is the stage of mind's conquest. The world is nothing but an extension of mind. In Krishna's words, the transient world is conquered right here, upon this bank and shoal of time, by men who have achieved even-mindedness. But what is the relation between such equanimity of mind and subjugation of the world? If the world itself is conquered, where does one halt? According to Krishna, God is flawless and impartial, and unaffected by passion, and so is the mind of the man who has secured knowledge. So the two become one. In brief, the world is an expanded form of the mind. So the mutable world is the object that has to be offered as a sacrifice. When the mind is perfectly controlled, there is also perfect control over the world. The outcome of yajna appears clearly when the mind is fully restrained. The nectar of knowledge that is generated by yajna takes the man who has tasted it to the immortal God. This is witnessed by all sages who have realized God. It is not that worshippers of different schools perform yajna in different ways. The different forms cited in the Gita are only the higher and lower states of the same worship. That by which this yajna begins to be done is action. There is not a single verse in the entire Gita which defends or approves of worldly enterprise as a way to the realization of God. Usually, for the performance of yajna, people build an altar, light a fire on it, and intoning swaha, cast barley grains and oil seeds into the sacred fire. Is this, we may ask, not yajna? Krishna has this to say about it. Sacrifice through wisdom is, O Parantap, in every way superior to sacrifices made with material objects, because, O Part, all action ceases in knowledge, their culmination. The yajna of wisdom, made by means of austerity, continence, faith, and knowledge, which brings about a direct perception of God, is the most propitious. All actions are fully dissolved in this knowledge. Knowledge is thus the crowning point of yajna. Thenceforth, there is neither any profit in the doing of action, nor any loss in abstaining from it. In the same way, there are yajna that are performed with material objects, but they are insignificant in comparison with the yajna of knowledge, which enables a man to have direct perception of God. Even if we sacrifice millions, build hundreds of altars for the sacred fire, contribute money to good causes, and invest money in the service of sages and saints, this yajna is much inferior to the sacrifice of knowledge. Krishna has just told us that real yagya is restraint of the vital winds of life, subduing of the senses, and control of the mind. From where can we learn its mode? Krishna's pronouncement is that it can be had from only one source, namely, the sage who has known the reality.
Tadviddhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina.
Obtain that knowledge from sages through reverence, inquiry, and innocent solicitation, and the sages who are aware of reality will initiate you into it. So Arjuna is advised to approach seers with reverence, self-surrender, and humility, to be instructed in true knowledge through devoted service and guileless curiosity. These seers will enlighten him on it. The ability to acquire this knowledge comes only with a wholly dedicated service. They are seers who enable us to have direct perception of God. They know the mode of yagya, and they will teach it to Arjuna. Had the war been external, what need was there of a seer? Is not Arjuna standing directly before the Lord? Then why does Krishna ask him to go to a seer? In truth, the meaning of Krishna, who was a yogi, indeed a yogeshwar, is that today the worshipper is with him, but he may be confused in the future when he is no longer present to guide him. Ah me, Arjuna will say, Krishna has gone, and I do not know to whom to turn now for guidance. That is why Krishna tells Arjuna categorically that he should approach seers who will instruct him in true knowledge. Knowing which, O son of Pandu, you will never again be a prey like this to attachment. And equipped with this knowledge, you will see all beings within yourself and then within me. After acquiring this knowledge from sages, Arjuna will be rid of all attachment. Possessed of this knowledge, he will perceive all beings in his self. That is, he will see the extension of the same self everywhere, and only then can he become one with God. Thus, the means of attaining to that God is the sage who has perceived reality. Even if you are the most heinous sinner, the ark of knowledge will carry you safely across all evils. We should not make the error of concluding from this that we will know salvation even with committing more and yet more sin. Krishna rather intends to say by this that we should not be under the mistaken impression that we are such great sinners that there cannot be salvation for us. So this is Krishna's message of hope and courage to Arjuna and to everybody, that despite being the doer of sins greater than the sins of all sinners, he will sail across sins successfully by the ark of knowledge acquired from seers. Thus,
Yathaidhamsi samidhogni bhasmasat kurute Arjuna jnanagni sarvakarmani bhasmasat kurute tatha.
blazing fire turns fuel to ashes, so verily, O Arjun, the fire of knowledge reduces all action to ashes. Here we have a portrayal not of an introduction to knowledge through which one approaches yajna, but of the culmination of knowledge or perception of God, in which there is first the destruction of all unrighteous inclinations, and in which then even the act of meditation is dissolved. The one who had to be attained to has been attained. Now, who is there to look for by further meditation? The sage, with the wisdom that arises from perception of God, brings his actions to an end. But where does this perception of God occur? Is it an external or internal phenomenon?
नहि ज्ञानेन सदृशं पवित्रमिह विद्यते तत्स्वयं योगसंसिद्धः कालेन. आत्मनि विन्दति.
Doubtlessly, nothing in the world is more purifying than this knowledge, and your heart will realize it spontaneously when you have attained to perfection on the way of action. Nothing in this world purifies as this knowledge does, and this knowledge will be manifest to the doer alone, not to anyone else, when his practice of yoga has reached maturity, not at its inception, not in the middle, not externally, but within his heart, within his self. What is the required ability for this knowledge? In the words of the Yogeshwar, worshipper of true faith, who has subdued his senses, attains to this knowledge, and at the very moment of attainment, he is rewarded with the benediction of supreme peace. For realization of God, one needs to possess faith, determination, and restraint of the senses. If there is no intensely felt curiosity for the knowledge of God, even taking refuge in a seer will not bring it. Also, mere faith is not enough. The worshipper's effort may be feeble. Therefore, the determination to proceed resolutely along the prescribed way is a necessity. Along with this, it is also necessary to restrain the senses. Realization of the Supreme God will not come easily to one who is not free from desire. So only a man who has faith, enthusiasm for action, and restraint of the senses can have this knowledge. And the very moment this knowledge dawns upon him, he is blessed with the ultimate peace, because after this, there is nothing more to strive for. After this, he will never know anything other than peace. But
अज्ञश्च श्रद्धधानश्च संशयात्मा विनश्यति नायं लोकोऽस्ति न परो न सुखं संशयात्मनः.
for a skeptic, bereft of faith and knowledge, who strays from the path of righteousness, there is happiness neither in this world nor in the next. He loses both the worlds. For the man who is ignorant of the way of yajna, for the doubting man who is devoid of faith and who strays from the path of good, there is no happiness, no next life in human form, and no God. So if there are any doubts in the worshipper, he should go to a seer and resolve them, or else he will never know the reality. So who is blessed with knowledge?
Yoga sannyasta karmanam jnana sanchinna saushayam atmavantam na karmani nibadnanti dhananjaya.
O Dhananjay, action cannot bind the man who relies on God and who has surrendered all his actions to him by the practice of karma yoga, and all whose doubts have been put to rest by knowledge. Action cannot enslave the man whose deeds are dissolved in God by the practice of yoga, whose doubts have been resolved by perception, and who is united with God. Action will be brought to an end only by yoga. Only knowledge will destroy doubts. So Krishna finally says,
तस्मादज्ञानसम्भूतं हृत्स्थं ज्ञानासीनात्मनः चित्वैनं संशयं योगम् आतिष्ठोत्तिष्ठ भारत.
So, O Bharat, dwell in yoga and stand up to cut down this irresolution that has entered your heart because of ignorance with the steel of knowledge. Arjuna has to fight, but the enemy, irresolution, is within his own heart, not outside. When we proceed on the way of devotion and contemplation, it is but natural that feelings of doubt and passion will arise as obstacles before us. These enemies launch a fearful assault. To fight them and overcome them through the destruction of uncertainties by the practice of the ordained yajna is the war that Arjuna has to wage, and the result of this war for him will be absolute peace and victory, after which there is no possibility of defeat. Conclusion. At the outset of the chapter, Krishna says that he had imparted knowledge of yoga to Vivaswat in the beginning. Vivaswat taught it to Manu, and Manu to Ikshwaku, and thus the knowledge evolved to the state of Rajas. The teacher who had imparted this knowledge was Krishna, or in other words, one who is birthless and unmanifest. A realized sage also is birthless and unmanifest. His body is but an abode in which he dwells. It is God himself who speaks through his voice. It is by some such sage that yoga is imparted. Even a glance of such a sage irradiates one's life breath with the effulgence of self-realization. Possessing the light it sends forth, the sun symbolizes the ever-luminous God who resides in, as well as expresses himself through, breath. Imparting the knowledge of Yagya to the sun stands for awakening of the divine life that lies dormant and unperceived in every human heart. Transmitted to breath, this light is hallowed into a sacred discipline. In due course, it enters the mind as a resolve. Realization of the significance of Krishna's utterance to Vivaswat gives rise to a hankering for achieving it, and yoga is then transformed into action. The point in hand needs further elaboration. Vivaswat, Manu, and Ikshwaku are symbolic primogenitors of mankind. Vivaswat represents the unenlightened primitive man without spiritual awakening. It is a sage who sows the seeds of devotion in this man. There then comes into being a desire for God that arises in the mind, which is Manu in microcosm. The mind transforms the aspiration into an acute craving, which is embodied as Ikshwaku, and the process of changing it into practice is speeded up. After having gone through the first two stages, when the worshipper is endowed with divine impulses, the yearning for God enters upon the third stage, when yoga becomes known and begins to manifest its glory. This is indeed a stage fraught with risk, for yoga is now on the brink of destruction. But they who are loved devotees and dear friends are provided with succor by sages like Krishna. When Arjuna refers to his recent birth, Krishna points out that although unmanifest, imperishable, birthless, and pervading all beings, he yet manifests himself by Atamaya and by subduing by his yoga his nature with its three properties. What then does he do after manifesting himself? Since the beginning, he has undergone one incarnation after another to protect that which is fit for accomplishment, as well as to destroy forces which give rise to evils and to strengthen the godlike Dharma. His birth and acts are of a metaphysical nature, and only a seer can perceive them. Krishna has further explained the mode of God's manifestation, of how it is an event that occurs within the heart of a devoted yogi, and certainly never externally. Krishna has said that action does not bind him, and just so, they who have attained to the same state are not bound by action. He has also said unambiguously that this knowledge he can acquire only by his own action, rather than through the conduct or action of others. Also, it will come to him when his yoga is in an accomplished stage, rather than at the outset. Perception of knowledge will be within the sphere of the heart, not outside, and it comes only to those who are dedicated, determined, in control of their senses, and free from all doubt. So finally, Arjuna is advised to sever the irresolution in his heart with the sword of renunciation. Thus, war is within the heart. The war of the Gita is quite unconcerned with any external conflict. In this chapter, Krishna has thus mainly elaborated and explained the nature and form of yajna, and added that the deed of accomplishing it is action. Thus concludes the 4th chapter in the Upanishad of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita on the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit, the science of yoga, and the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, entitled Yajna Karm Spashtikaran, or Elucidation of the Deed of Yajna. Thus concludes Swami Adgaranand's exposition of the 4th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in Yatharth Gita. Hari Om Tat Sat. Krishna refuted him and affirmed that there would be Varnsankar only if he, Arjuna, was not assiduously engaged in his appointed task. In fact, God himself is the true Varn, or quality, of self. Straying from the path that takes one to the eternal God is, therefore, the aberration called Varnsankar. If the saint who has perceived God desists from performance of the worthy task, by following his example, others will also lose sight of their duties and become Varnsankar, for conflicting properties of nature are then combined in them. It is in this sense that a sage is the cause of destruction of mankind if he does not induce others to act, while he is himself earnestly engaged in his prescribed task. Realization of the indestructible God, the root from which everything is born, is life, whereas to be engrossed in the innumerable objects of nature and stray from the divine path is death. So that sage who does not induce other men to walk along the path of action is a destroyer, verily a murderer of humanity. He is a destroyer of mankind if he does not check the frittering away of minds and senses and compel other men to keep to the right path. He is then an embodiment of violence. True nonviolence is cultivating one's own self and simultaneously also urging others to spiritual discipline and growth. According to the Gita, physical death is only a change of perishable bodies, and there is no violence in this. So Krishna tells Arjuna, as the ignorant act with a feeling of attachment to their actions, even so, O Bharat, the wise ought to act for the preservation of the divinely established world order. A wise man, selfless and endowed with spiritual knowledge, acts in order to inspire the hearts of other men to act for their own good, just like any selfish and ignorant man. We may be ignorant even though we know the way of and practice yajna. Knowledge is direct perception. So long as we are even in the least removed from God, and He, the desired one, from us, ignorance is present. When this darkness prevails, there is attachment to action and its consequences. The selfless meditate with a devotion which is very much similar to the attachment with which the ignorant do their work. There can be no attachment in men who are unconcerned with doing. But even these sages ought to act for the good of the world and for the strengthening of forces of piety, so that other men take to the right path.